Welcome back to Let's Make a Game, a channel about making computer role-playing games using the free program Twine and the Sugarcube format for Twine. In this video, I would like to continue talking about my current project of coding the combat system for a viewer's game. More specifically, I'd like to finish off talking about the code for picking up weapons that are on the ground, and I'd also like to talk about a new weapon which the person whose game this is has asked me to add, the chainsaw. So let's get into the code. So first of all, we'll deal with the code for picking up weapons on the ground. At the end of the last video, I said that I thought we were going to need a new page for the code. I'd set up the button, but the button sent you to a page which I hadn't, a passage, sorry, which I hadn't yet coded. When I looked at it further, I realized that was wrong. You could actually just do it in the button. So let's have a look at that. So this is one of these cases where we print some code. So what I'll do is I'll type up an example of what the code that is printed might look like, and then that'll make it easier to see what's going on. So here we have a button that says something like broom to main hand. Obviously it'll be different depending on what the weapon in question is. And it sends you to next action, which is the place we've seen quite a lot of already. It's the place that you go once you've completed an action, as the name would suggest. As you can see, there's lots of arrows leading there. So it's a fairly frequent destination. Okay, so broom to main hand, next action, via button. I will indent this code as well to make it easier to follow, even though the printing, it doesn't do that. So it'll be something like set weapon 0 equals thrown Z1. You can see that I've done this as set weapon 0 equals the value of thrown Z1. I could have, instead of how I've done it here, I could have done it as so that it equals, set weapon 0 equals 5 or whatever it is, but the effect is identical, of course. Oops. Oh, sorry. Okay. So it will print code that is sorry, let's delete that. Okay. So it'll print code that is something like this. A button. The text on the button is broom to main hand, or the equivalent. The destination is next action. Before we go to that destination, there's a bit of code. And the bit of code is that we need to put the new weapon in the player character's hand, and we need to delete it from the ground. It's no longer on the ground, and it's in the player character's hand. Those are two separate commands. We set weapon 0. Weapon is the array that deals with what's in the main hand of a character, either the player character or one of their companions. In this case, because the number is 0, it's the player character. It equals thrown Z1. Thrown is the array that keeps track of weapons that have been thrown and are now on the ground. And slot 1 means that that's where we keep track of the type of weapon. So it will equal the number for a broom or a blunt machete or a sharp machete. To delete it off the ground, we look at thrown Z2, which is the slot that keeps track of the location, and we set the location to -100. The numbers of locations refer to the range bands. It's the same thing as when we print on the screen distance 5, distance 4, etc. down to, in this case, down to distance 0. Sometimes there's negative numbers, sometimes there's numbers that are higher than 5, but it will never go to minus 100. And so when we set it to minus 100, that's just sort of, it's thoroughly off the battlefield. It's thoroughly sort of nowhere. It won't be displayed anymore. So if, in effect, it disappears. Why don't we set it to 0, which is what you'd normally do to delete a value? Well, 0 is one of the values that we're using. 0 is actually the range band of the player character. So 0 is actually its current value, because if we're picking it up, it has to be where the player character is, of course, and the player character is always considered to be in slot 0. That's wherever the player character is, that's range band 0. So in this case, we can't use 0, which is probably the usual value we'd use to indicate that we're sort of getting rid of something. So we set it to minus 100, just an arbitrary number that's well out of the scale that we do. And the code for the other button is exactly the same, except for instead of weapon 0, it goes to offhand 0. And the message is, instead of saying put the broom in your main hand, it's broom to offhand, of course. So that was fairly simple, as I said, and as you can see, it doesn't need a new page, despite what I said. So the other thing that I've done is the designer of this game wanted to add a chainsaw. And the chainsaw has two special characteristics. One, it is it is a one-hit weapon. It will kill an insect, a giant mosquito, with a single hit. And secondly, it's considered to sort of splatter a lot of blood and guts everywhere. And so when you use it, if you hit, you have to make a special roll. And if you fail the roll, you sort of miss your next turn. You're sort of disgusted. So it's the equivalent of being knocked over, but it's mechanically it's a separate thing. In the story of the game, it's treated as a different thing. You're not meant to be knocked over. You're meant to be sort of freaked out by suddenly having all this blood over you. So how do we do an instant kill? How do we say, well, it just kills with a single hit? Well, there's really two ways we could do it. We could have a special code where we have the code that does damage. We could say, well, normally do what we've already coded, but if it's this special type of weapon, then it just does whatever damage it needs to do. And that's good in some ways. That would work well. The other way, a sort of slightly lazier way, is just give it a really high damage. Just give it a damage that's higher than any enemy's hit points are ever going to be. And that's what we've done. We just said we'll give it a damage of 20. No insect is ever going to have 20 hit points. So just because of the way it works, it's simulating the roll of two 6-sided dice. So and then there's adds and stuff, but it can never get higher than about 15. I think is probably the maximum. So if we make it 20, that's an instant kill. And that's all we do. We just go. We have to put it in WEA OVR. We indicate that it's called a chainsaw. That's slot 0. We have a little description. Don't wear your good clothes. That was just something I made up. This doesn't appear in the game yet. I assume it will appear in the sort of extended version of the game, the finished version of the game. The next slot is how many ways to attack with it. There's only one. The next slot is how many hands does it use. It's a two-handed weapon. And then we have to set up an attack down in WEA_ATT. We have to call it chainsaw space 1. We have to make sure we're using the same spelling and capitalization and everything as in this slot here. Then we give it a name, rip. We give it the maximum range, 0, which, as we've discussed before, the ranges are 0, 1, and 2, but that actually means 1, 3, and 5 range bands. So this means it can attack something that's 1 range band away, because enemies are never 0 range bands away. Then we have its damage, and then we have its ammunition use. Now, technically, of course, in real life, chainsaws use fuel. So, in a way, it would be using ammunition, or it would be using the equivalent of ammunition, but for the purposes of the game, we're just assuming that you have enough fuel. So we count it as 0 weapon, so it's the same as a club or a sword or a machete or something. A weapon that you can use an unlimited number of times. And so we don't have to have any new code, we just slot it into the existing system and it works. But how then do we do the special roll? Well, that is something that we're going to have to leave till the next video, because that roll is against a skill and we haven't done the system of skills yet. And that's something that that's what I'll be dealing with next week. Every persona has specific skills which are similar to attributes and based on attributes, but there's a few little tweaks. You can't just say, well, it's a roll against strength or strong, which is how it's put in this game. You can't just do it as a roll against an attribute. It is some personas use different skills. But that's something that I will be dealing with next week. I'll leave it there for now. And as usual, I hope that was useful or interesting to at least some of you. And I hope you will tune in next time.